magic. The power to create, destroy, and bend reality with a flick of the wrist and a mighty thought. Mana, the resource and power that the greatest archmages, elder dragons, and artificers all pull from to perform acts of God. This is a balance that you and I have kind of come to accept as a rule of fantasy. All great mages use mana or ether or something of the sort, and to channel it, they use nature, mana conduits, or arcane relics. But there is one primal source of power, a natural gift to those who wield it in fiction and even in our own real world that hovers above all other, the Black Lotus. The Forbidden Bloom, God's gift to mana ramp, the ultimate tool of card game destruction, and also the most expensive piece of cardboard ever printed. It is the card with such overwhelming power and also status that it has become synonymous with Magic the Gathering itself. What be a Black Lotus? This is one of the few cards that I think kind of needs very little context for you to understand what it actually is. Like, undeniably, it's the one card and thing in Magic that transcends the space itself. Even those who don't know anything else about Magic the Gathering besides that it's a card game know about this one card. Like Blake here from our team, who's a complete Magic noob. Now, does Blake know what it does? Why it's so good, broken, and expensive? No, but he does know of it, and that I think speaks real volumes. But let's be real, like, what actually is it? In the lore of Magic the Gathering, it's exactly what one might imagine. It's a plant that gives a lot of magical power to the wielder and is at the center of a couple of early Magic stories, as well as some niche references here and there that we'll also cover later on. However, first, I actually want to take a detour from my usual heavy lore-only stuff and explain this one in terms of gameplay first. Because literally, on paper, the Black Lotus is also surprisingly simple. It is a zero-cost card that, when tapped, adds 3 mana of a single color to your mana pool, and then it goes to the graveyard. And this effect can be used at any point at instant speed, which just by nature of existing is uber broken, because it does exist in a game where mana cost is the only thing that prevents cards from just being stacked in rapid succession. It usually takes at least a couple of turns to really get something online and going, even in the most optimized formats like Legacy or Modern. It's the reason that a card like Sol Ring, that costs 1 mana and gives you 2 mana as a result, is essential in pretty much every single deck in any format that it's actually legal in, because it's simply such an unfair mana ramping advantage. Now take that and make that infinitely more viable by nature of it being free and then giving you even more mana. And now also take into account that when this card was originally created, there was no limit to how many copies of a card you could have. So if you wanted tons of mana and not run any lands in your deck, all you had to do was throw in a bunch of Lotuses, and then you could just fireball or cast any murder spells before your opponent could even ever get a go. Actually, if you're curious, the formula was as follows. I kind of looked into it. First turn Windex comprised of 20 Black Lotuses, 20 Channel, and 20 Fireball. Yes, there were people who had 20 Black Lotuses casually in their deck, probably without putting them into sleeves, which is just making me cringe so hard. Fun fact also, this is why the 4-copy playset rule was actually created, to avoid this absurd style of play that is kind of boring as hell if we're being completely honest. Now, before we can truly understand why the Black Lotus became the most infamous card in trading card game history, we need to understand the absolutely ridiculous company that it keeps. The Black Lotus is not alone. It is the big boy, but it does have siblings. That's because, as you might know, the Black Lotus is one of the legendary Power 9, a collection of 9 cards from Magic's earliest sets that were just so absurdly overpowered that they basically become sacred relics overnight. All of these cards came from Magic's original 1993 alpha, beta, and then unlimited printings back when Richard Garfield and Wizards of the Coast were still kind of figuring out what the game even was gonna be. That early on, clearly no one really thought about balance. In those earliest years, the design philosophy was a lot more experimental, but undeniably, the Power 9 were non-negotiable in terms of status. They were the best cards by leaps and bounds in the entire game. The Power 9 consists of the Black Lotus, the 5 solo color Moxen, Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, and Time Twister. Every single one of them fundamentally breaks one of the game's core rules, basically. Ancestral Recall gives you absurd card draw for basically nothing. Time Walk literally gives you another turn. That worked perfectly with all of these single turn demon cards. The Moxen provided small doses of just free mana forever. Black Lotus became the God King because it represents the purest expression of what makes a Magic card broken. No downsides, it just grants free explosive power right now when you cast it.
I need it on my desk now!
Because the card again costs 0 mana to play and can immediately just be sacrificed for 3 mana of any single color. In modern Magic design, that effect is just beyond absolutely insane and without question can be turned into a turn 1 win in like a million different ways at this point. But back in 1993, before nearly every single one of my team members was born, sorry Blake, had to do that one to you. Well, back in those dinosaur times where probably there wasn't even color television, nobody fully understood just how dangerous fast mana truly would become. The game was still brand new, nobody knew what optimization was, I don't think that was even a word yet probably. Competitive metas, more like competitive no meta. And then somebody, probably some guy named Yawgmothfan6969, actually realized that multiple turns worth of resources immediately is maybe like the strongest thing you can possibly do in a game about resource management, which, you know, at its core, Magic the Gathering, of course, is. And so suddenly, Black Lotus became the GOAT. And the Power 9, they just became uber nasty, but not as uber nasty as Mr. Lotus of Death here. The card that broke reality. But let's be real here. You and I both know that the true legacy of this card isn't in the Power 9 or the lore, it's finances. It's all about that cold, hard cash and how much of it can you actually spend on a Black Lotus? Because the Black Lotus is just as much of a cultural artifact at this point, of course, as it is a gameplay artifact. In the lore of the story, those who wield the Lotus are very powerful mages, but in reality, those who wield the Lotus are just freaking wealthy as duck on black plate. Which is to say, they are also quite powerful. Money and mana are one and the same, it seems. Holographic, shadowless base set Charizard? Worthless. The One Ring, the one of one rings that Post Malone has? Nothing. Only one card in history has ever been worth more than the Black Lotus, a very specific copy of the illustrated Pikachu, which usually is worth way less than the Black Lotus, and was really only inflated by the nature of this guy, Jesus, the vilest of men, Logan Paul, please stay away from Magic, man, being a part of both its sales of the same card, which means that I am not gonna count it. But coming back to the Lotus, how did a piece of cardboard ever get to this point? How is iconic rap artist turned country bad boy Post Malone involved in it, and what does it currently sit at price-wise? Well, that long and lonesome road is actually beyond fascinating. First off, why is a Lotus so freaking expensive? Well, the first major reason why Lotus just exploded in value is pretty simple: scarcity. Good old scarcity. For those of you not aware of the basic fundamentals of business economics, let me quickly elaborate here. I am, in fact, a business guy. Even though I do YouTube for work, I have a business major. And it actually all hinges on the foundation of value. If a resource is abundant and free, it typically has no market value, like air. At least so far. The principle of scarcity then gives a good or a service its financial value and dictates its price on the market. And I know what you're thinking, Manu, please get to the point and move on. Well, here's the context for our dear Lotus. There are only so many original copies in existence. Especially alpha printings, the first set of Magic the Gathering is crazy rare, and thus high-quality alpha copies of the Lotus are the rarest and most expensive. Now, typically, this would then lead to the secondary aspect of scarcity in the marketplace. Scarcity is the driving force behind supply and demand. As a resource becomes scarcer, naturally, its price starts rising, which naturally reduces demand or encourages the development of substitutes. But, Mr. Manu, wouldn't that mean that there are substitutes for the Black Lotus? It's so popular and powerful, surely everyone would just buy them and then the Black Lotus would tank in value. And yes, good question. In most situations, this would happen, but Wizards of the Coast does not agree. You see, in the mid-90s, collectors became absolutely terrified that Wizards of the Coast might endlessly just reprint old cards and thus destroy their newly found value. So in response to these pleas, Wizards created the infamous Reserve List, a promise that certain cards would never be reprinted in tournament legal form ever again. And Black Lotus, very lonely, sits at the absolute top of that mountain. That single decision transformed old Magic cards from rare collectibles into permanently finite assets. Never would any of these cards be printed ever again. That's the promise. And so suddenly, Black Lotus became less like a golden card and instead like black gold, the vile oil, humanity's greatest resource. And very much like oil, it was built off the bones of dinosaurs, the 1993 dinosaurs who later became fossil fuels that Post Malone runs in his $1 million Magic decks. Speaking of which, we can actually double down on the value of the card, inflating the price even more because human desire demands that the Lotus be more expensive. The desires of Post Malone, who may sound like I'm harshly critiquing, but I'm actually not. He seems pretty fun. I'd love to have him on the channel someday and play a game of Magic, if you're watching. Because as I've made crystal clear, the Black Lotus is the card, the one card to have. It escaped the game itself decades ago and just cast all its dust onto the zeitgeist of pop culture. It represents the very beginning of trading card gaming as we know it today. It's the card, not the Magic the Gathering card of cards, it's the card game greatest of all time. And so, as time progressed, the numbers started becoming absolutely absurd. Copies began selling for tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and then eventually over $500,000, depending on condition and grading. One signed PSA 10 graded Alpha Black Lotus shattered records by selling for over $500,000. And that's where it sat for quite a while actually, until Post Malone, master wizard of Magic the Gathering, entered and got his own Lotus for $800,000 US. Post Malone, it's kind of awesome, man, and he spread the good gospel of this TCG to the masses plenty of times before, notably with his purchase of the one-of-one copy of The One Ring for $2 million, which actually was the former record holder until March of 2024, when the most expensive Lotus ever was sold. Also, very quickly, this is Manu from the future speaking. I forgot to put it in the video, but if you're watching this on mobile and you want to support the channel and you want more videos like this and you want to help us, gain more resources, it would be great if you could swipe to the side where the like button is and actually hype the video. We found that it actually makes a crazy difference and we'd really appreciate it if you could help us out here. Otherwise, yeah, back to the video. And since I know you've been waiting, for reference, the most expensive Lotus has clocked in at a clean, crisp, affordable 3 million US dollars. That is some absolutely ludicrous amount of money for a piece of cardboard, and I spend way too much money on these cards already. But I also must admit that just from a psychological standpoint, there's also just something deeply revealing about what people are actually buying here. Let's be real, no one spends that kind of money because they need a Black Lotus for gameplay. You can't use it. It's banned except in Vintage where it's restricted. What they're actually buying though is of course symbolism, a feeling. Owning a Lotus screams to the rest of the world that you, good sir, are swinging a big giant old Falcon Black Plate. You're the man with the big typhoid rats who owns a Black Lotus. You possess one of the foundational relics of an entire industry. In reality, I feel like it kind of reflects how modern culture treats nostalgia itself as a luxury commodity at this point. But then there's also like a weird sadness underneath all of this, if you ask me. Like, the nature of the Lotus is the antithesis of what the card was actually designed to be. It has become so valuable that it could never serve the function of the card itself. The card was designed to be played, of course, sacrificed even, but now they're on display, never in a deck, and absolutely worshipped. Which, wait a second, lore-wise is actually weirdly fitting, come to think of it. The crown jewel of House Carthalion. Ironically, the Black Lotus has a way smaller lore presence than I actually expected going into this video. I thought it would be like this uber powerful relic that's all over Magic's history, but it's actually not. It is very powerful, don't get me wrong, but not like the Silex, the Chain Veil, or the Immortal Sun is. It's more like, Lightning Greaves? Maybe that's disingenuous, but you kind of get the point. On Dominaria, which was kind of the OG main plane of Magic where most of the lore took place, they are very important, the Lotuses, but not universe-breaking important, if that makes sense. The Black Lotus mostly exists as this mysterious, mythical, magical flower drifting around the edges of Dominaria's history in a few ways. For example, it is said that at the legendary Tolarian Academy, Black Lotuses are actually grown in the Lotus Vale. It's kind of like finding out that Princeton has a dank wheat farm in the basement where only the finest of the Devil's Lettuce actually gets grown. And we actually also know for a fact that Black Lotuses also naturally grow within Whispering Woods, an ancient forest in the North Arona region of Dominaria. Something that's actually revealed in the lore of the story, which, come to think of it, actually seems to give the flower this really interesting dual identity. And on the one hand, it's the ultimate collector artifact and symbol of greed in the real world, but in universe, it's still part of nature, a very special, like sacred part of nature, a rare magical blossom hidden deep within the deepest wilderness, only grown by the great wizards who care for its status, not abusing it. However, I'd be absolutely silly to not also discuss the most important lore surrounding the Black Lotus, because this comes from the tales of House Carthalion, one of Dominaria's most ancient noble bloodlines. Actually, a bunch of them. They kind of feel like the Targaryens mixed with the Starks. Like, I'm not fully sure, to be honest with you. I haven't dug that far into all of them and their geopolitical family influences. There's some good guys, there's some bad guys, there's some guys who do some other stuff, but I did dig very deeply into the part about the Lotus so that I could be a good little lore boy for you and bring you the freshest, or in this case, the finest, most well-aged lore. Turns out that a Black Lotus was the relic of House Carthalion, and the main story of it begins with Adam Carthalion. He discovered the Black Lotus when he was a young boy, before his father took him into the city to see a marching band, well, actually some other stuff, but you get it. Eventually, the artifact was stored within House Scarlet in Arthoxia, protected carefully due to its immense magical potential. Adam Carthalion also ruled House Scarlet, for context, and then enter Jared Carthalion, Adam's son, who actually makes a great commander. I have him, and he kind of does this fun thing where, you know, if you're the monarch and you punch him, he gets bigger, and he's kind of indestructible. Fun deck. Back to his lore and the Lotus though, to be completely clear, the next things I'm about to describe are like just totally 90s fantasy. Kinda love it. It's gonna sound really simple with an absolutely unnecessary amount of complexity in the names, but that's the world of post-Brother War Magic the Gathering Dominaria. Here we go. Jared managed to gain access to the relic after the Mistress of House Scarlet allowed him inside and revealed the Lotus to him. Jared was then left to the streets when his dad died, and so this was a big deal because he got access to the home that he was supposed to have, but didn't. And so naturally, instead of simply admiring the Lotus, Jared stole it because it was technically his by birthright, which I don't really think counts as stealing. Really? Later on, during the conflict with an evil planeswalker named Ravidel, who caused his father's death actually, Jared used the Black Lotus to then summon a Shivan dragon, which gobbled Ravidel up. As I said, peak 90s magic. The Legacy of the Blossom. So, that's the Magic the Gathering lore part of it, but it's not the only lore surrounding the Black Lotus. One of my absolute favorite things about Black Lotus is that Wizards of the Coast just absolutely knows how legendary and iconic the card is, and thus, they sneak it around as a reference or pay homage to it all the time. One of the earliest funny knots actually appeared outside of Magic entirely in a different Wizards of the Coast property, because in Baldur's Gate 2, Shatters of Am, smugglers referenced trafficking rare Black Lotuses well before the iconic MTG and D&D crossovers of the modern era. But in lore and in-game, there's an even more interesting way that the Black Lotus comes up. Remember, I've been telling you this entire video that the Black Lotus is a banned card, except for Vintage, where you can play one, that just cannot be used in like 99% of the game, but that's technically also not true. There is, in fact, another way that you at home can actually use a Black Lotus in a legal format, and that is through the very fun use of Garth One-Eye. Garth One-Eye is another lore character, the main character of the first Magic the Gathering story Arena, and he can literally create a Black Lotus, which means that Black Lotus is technically playable in formats where Garth is legal. Modern, Commander, Vintage, Legacy players, you can all rejoice. You too can now use your own Black Lotus, so long as you get old Garthy Boy online. And speaking of Arena, in the other Magic the Gathering Arena, the video game version of the TCG, Black Lotus does exist, but you can't make it. I assume that's for cards like Garth that allow you to bring it into play, but I find it quite funny that in-game you can't even own it, you can just activate it after creating a copy of it through another card effect. There's of course also the card Oracle of the Alpha, which actually was a digital-only card that has now been printed through mystery boosters, but it's not really legal in any paper formats. I really wanted to get my hands on one of these, but they go for crazy prices, and I don't own any of the Power 9, so there's no real point in doing it, but it's really fun that it's like a thing. And of course, I can't talk about the Black Lotus and its legacy without also discussing the entire ecosystem of Lotus-adjacent cards that Wizard have made over the years in an attempt to bring the design of this card back into the game. Lion's Eye Diamond here is probably its most infamous successor, a card so powerful that it became a combo engine monster in Eternal formats despite its brutal discard drawback, which is why it's limited in certain formats and is a game changer in Commander, since with the right resources, it just goes absolutely insane. Then Lotus Petal of course captures the same sacrificial burst of mana in a much fairer form, still good, but also, you know, having absolutely gorgeous artwork that makes it feel like a delicate fragment of the original Lotus mythology, and even those kind of can get pretty pricey at this point. I personally think that this is one of the coolest card arts, period. It's just like really pretty, and I really like that. Now, from a lore standpoint, one of the most interesting versions is Gilded Lotus, as In lore, this is the result of a Lotus blooming on the artificial machine plane of Mirrodin. I really appreciate that attention to detail. But easily one of the funniest tributes to the Black Lotus is Jewel Lotus, which Wizards specifically designed for all of us Commander players. Jewel Lotus has nearly the same build and effect as Black Lotus. It's 0 cost, it grants 3 mana of 1 color, it has to be sacrificed, but it has 2 added limitations. One, of course, was the format's inherent limitation, which is you can only have 1 copy of it in your deck, but the second is that this 3 mana of 1 color can only be used to summon your commander. And despite all of that, in the most Black Lotus outcome imaginable, the card became so explosively strong that it eventually, famously, not that long ago, got banned in Commander as well. The format this card was designed for, it's too strong to exist in. I see that the Lotus bloodline remains undefeated. Now, of course, there are tons of other Lotuses, and I really can't talk about all of them, but I mean, here are some on screen real quick in like a speedrun format. Lotus Bloom, Lotus Blossom, Lotus Cobra, Lotus Field, which just got banned in Modern, Lotus Guardian, Lotus Veil, mentioning that one earlier, and then Lotus Ring, Nyx Lotus, which actually looks super cool thanks to the Theros flavoring, and Timeless Lotus. Eventually, Wizards realized Black Lotus had become so iconic that just parodying it was inevitable, and thus gave rise to actually 2 joke versions of the card. There is Blacker Lotus, an uncard that requires player to physically tear the card apart to actually gain mana, for they know that this Lotus is too good to exist for long. And then came Mox Lotus, a gigantic silver-bordered monstrosity that costs 15 mana and taps for infinity, the perfect combination of the power 9 in 1 card. And now all that remains is to figure out what the strongest artifact in the lore actually is, and if you want to find that out and what might be stronger than a Black Lotus, you should watch this video right here where I go over the best, coolest, and most insane artifacts in the history of Magic the Gathering's lore. Otherwise, let me know if you like a breakdown that's like this, which is like story lore, but also card history. It's very different from the other videos we've made on the channel, obviously. If you like them, let us know. If not, let me know as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.